the best place to start is never me trying to summarize your biography because I'll make a mess of it. So if you would just go ahead and tell esteemed audience a little bit about yourself and an overview of your career thus far.
Sure. So I'm a middle grade author, as you know, and I was born in San Francisco in 1987. I was born in a kind of countercultural family on an ashram. My mother followed a guru, and I had a fairly unusual childhood. And then we moved back to New Jersey, which is where my mom is from, when I was in kindergarten. And I grew up in New Jersey. We moved all over the state. So for anyone else out there from New Jersey, we probably have some places in common. Then instead of going to regular high school, I did independent study. I was technically homeschooled, and I spent a lot of time in the library, and I got my GED when I was 16. And I went back to the Bay Area for a year, and I went to a small college in Oakland called Mills, which is at least back then, about 10 or 15 years ago, it was very, a little bit run down and mysterious. And I'd always been a writer and always been working on books. But when I was at Mills, I feel like that was the period of my life when I really started seriously working on novels. Then I transferred to NYU and I lived at home. My mom lived in Jersey City throughout my teenage years and my 20s. So I commuted to NYU. And I graduated from there, and I worked for a literary agent and elsewhere in publishing. I met and married my husband, Travis Smalley, who's an artist and a teacher. He teaches at RISD in Rhode Island. And I worked at a digital arts nonprofit within the New Museum in New York, where I was a program coordinator, and then I was a managing editor for its online, kept this online journal of arts writing. So I did a lot of proofreading and editing and copy editing for that. And for its print.
None of which has come in handy at all for your career as an author, right?
Pardon?
But none of which has come in handy for your career as an author, right?
It's interesting because I feel like one thing I did learn by doing a lot of editing of other people's work that didn't have anything to do with fiction. It was all nonfiction, a lot of theoretical writing and writing of catalog essays for exhibitions. It did teach me a lot about humility, or maybe it goes both directions, where I had a lot of empathy for the people I was editing. So I was gentler with them maybe. And then it also came back, and I know what it's like to be on both sides of the word doc.
You know, so that softened your expectations for when some editor was coming after you later?
Yeah, well, Virginia Duncan, my editor, is very gentle. I mean, she's incredible, but everything is very, very subtle. So I haven't really had an editor who is extremely tough or abrasive, because Virginia's not like that.
I mean, I imagine with your experience as an editor and a proofreader, by the time she comes in, there's nothing left to do, right?
No, not at all. She came. So the manuscript that was sent out on submission for Coup I should have looked up how much it was when it went out. I think it was 50,000 words, and Virginia had me through. We didn't make any structural changes, or she didn't suggest any structural changes to Coup. But she suggested a lot of, in her line edits, adding description to scenes and adding dialogue, and it ended up being another 10,000 words. So she had me actually expand the book, but within the structure of what already was there. So we did a lot of edits.
Out of curiosity, just a really nerdy question, just right off the bat. What was the final word count, or pretty close to the final word count, before you published?
Oh, before it, in the
what's the version for the arc that I read?
60,800.
Okay.
So it's really long. It's in page count, but the manuscript that I actually submitted, I think, was 250 pages as a document, and it was 60,800 words. So they chose, they made a lot of design choices that made the book physical form longer, but it has fairly large type and white space.
Yeah, it was something that fascinated me, and I'm jumping all over the place. I know, but we should absolutely mention that "Coup" by Kaela Noel is available now, right? As we're talking,
March.
March 3rd.
Yes, it's available.
I can't remember if it's about to be available or if it just came. Either way, esteemed
March
audience, go to wherever
3rd.
books are sold. If it's there, buy it. If it's not, pre-order it. Pick it up during the week. You're going to have a good time either way.
Yes.
So something I wanted to ask you about. We'll just get straight to this question that I'm never sure what's. I always try to frame my questions, and if I were on the show, would I want to be asked this question? And I think I would, because 68,000 words is a little bit longer for middle grade. It's shorter than longer than the first Banneker, but honestly shorter than the second two. You know, pot to kettle. But as I read it, because of the way it's formatted, it's like over 400 pages as a paperback. When I came in the mail, I said, "Oh my God!" I was a little intimidated, and I'm not even the necessarily the intended audience. But then I look at it, and there is a lot of white spaces. There are paragraphs in any given page. Most of the paragraphs are under 3 lines or less. And it reads very fast, which then gave me this feeling of accomplishment as I'm going. Like, look at this big book that I'm reading so quickly.
There are also illustrations in the final version. So by Celia Crampian, who's fantastic. So that also takes up space.
Do you know? So when I encountered it, I thought, well, okay, there are some readers that maybe 3rd, 4th grade will come along and will say, "Whoa, that's a little bit challenging for me." And then there'll be other readers that come along and like, "I could do this. I can do it," and they're going to feel extra proud of themselves, even though realistically, 68,000 words. They've read all the Harry. I think all the Harry Potters are longer than that.
It's actually 60. It's actually 60,800. So almost 61,000. Yeah, the first Harry Potter is 75,000. I remember having that in mind when I was doing edits for a kind of sense of rhythm or length.
So in the original version, before you got anybody involved, you said it was about 50,000?
Yeah, 50 to 52, I think it was, somewhere in that range. So it was most of the edition was in description, adding things to dialogue and making certain scenes longer. But yeah, I hope kids feel confident to pick it up. I know when I was maybe not in 3rd grade, but by 4th or 5th grade, I definitely gravitated towards books that appeared to be longer because I liked the sense of accomplishment they gave. And I also definitely as a child, and I still have this as an adult, I would feel often a sense of wistfulness when a book I really liked was nearing the end. So I enjoyed longer books because they gave that sense of being immersed in the world for longer. And that was a feeling that I really sought out when I was a child.
Oh, I agree. And let's be clear: the kids that get intimidated, they weren't serious readers anyway.
Oh, no, that's really important because I wouldn't say I was a reluctant reader, but I was one of the last kids in 1st grade to learn to read, and I was initially labeled like a late reader, and I didn't catch up significantly until 3rd grade. In 3rd grade, they did gifted and talented testing, and I was put into the gifted class, which was great. We didn't really do any extra reading. We mostly did kinds of like word games almost, or puzzles, I remember. I remember being a little disappointed by that because I wanted to be doing reading. But prior to that, we had tracked reading groups in 2nd grade and 1st grade, and I was always in the group that needed help. I was a late reader by those standards. So I definitely empathize with kids who feel like reading is a struggle, because I remember that feeling.
So who is the ideal reader for Coup, and what would you have thought when you were the ideal reader?
I think I would have loved it because I loved any book that suggested other worlds, and I especially liked ones where the fantasy element was more tied to the world that we actually live in rather than a kind of Tolkien-esque fully formed other worlds, which I also later, I love those books as well now. But when I was a kid, I really liked books that gave you a sense of another way of the world could be from this world. Like my favorite aspect of the Narnia books, which I loved when I was a child, was that it was for children from this world who were able to go into another world. And with Ku, it's not a fantasy in that sense because there's no overt magic, but there's this sense of, well, could a girl live in secret on a roof and with a flock of pigeons? Is that possible? And the kind of imaginative possibilities of that. When I was a child, I loved a book that some people know, and then I'm always surprised some people have never. So few people have heard of it when I ask that now I'm surprised when people have heard of it. But the famous singer Julie Andrews, she actually also wrote middle grade books that were mostly published, I think, in the 70s. And one of them is called Mandy. She wrote it under the name Julie Edwards. And it's about a girl who lives in England in an orphanage, and she discovers this abandoned cottage that she begins sneaking to and making into her own home and her own world. And when I was a child, that was my favorite book. And I think that sense of having a space that's secret and a place to go, that was hugely appealing to me as a kid. And Ku sort of turns that around because it's not really a safe haven per se, but it is a world apart. And I also really liked survival stories when I was a kid, and Ku is sort of a survival story too.
I feel like I've undersold Ku because I really enjoyed this book, esteemed audience. I want you to listen to it. I was fascinated by the layout and the formatting, which is like the least interesting thing you could talk about.
Okay.
But I know that a lot of fellow book nerds listen to this show, which I always want to excite the book nerds like I get excited.